3 or 4 times a year, my family and I would travel to Canyon, Texas, right outside Amarillo, to visit my Mimi and Granddad. Due to the distance and the pace of life, we didn't always get to see them as much as we would have liked. But all the times going there, Granddad taught me something. Something I don't think he intentionally communicated to me at all. Granddad always laughed, and he had a million reasons not to. Throughout his life, things had been taken from him, and people had done him wrong. He'd been taken advantage of and mistreated. He'd had curveballs thrown at him by life, but never once did I hear him complain or talk about any of that. For as long as I can remember, my grandfather always had a smile on his face. He always said good morning and truly meant it. When my grandfather told stories of the past, he never mentioned negative things. He always told happy stories. He smiled, he laughed, and found joy even in the smallest things. When we would walk into his house after months of not seeing him, he never brought up how long it had been since we'd last been there or said how much he wished we'd come around more, even though I'm sure he really did. Instead, his eyes lit up. He would beat us to the door, taking our luggage from our hands, and as each of us entered one at a time, he would throw his small arms around us, kiss us on the cheek, and say, "It's so good to see you. I love you, hon." Every morning that we were there, he would get up early and go to work, but before he left, he hugged us as we drowsily sipped on coffee, kissed each of us again, and said, "I love you, hon." Sometimes, when we would wait our turn to get a plate at dinner, he'd stand behind me and gently pat my back and once again confirm, "I love you, hon." But as the years passed, his health declined, and things started to change. Granddad stopped getting up to go to work every morning. He stopped standing at the dinner line and patting my back. He stopped carrying our luggage in, and eventually, he stopped coming to the door at all. When we walked in, his eyes still lit up, but he stayed seated as we bent down to hug him. He still kissed our cheeks and said, "I love you, hon," but one trip in particular, I noticed, along with the exhaustion in his voice, a failed attempt to lift his left arm and return my embrace, a symptom that he'd never struggled with in the past. Usually trips to my grandparents' house were a time to rest. I took lots of naps, read a book, maybe watched a little TV. But at some point, I stopped doing all that, and I watched my grandfather instead of the television. I watched him during dinner struggle to pick up a salt and pepper shaker. I watched the way he would switch back and forth from the Summer Olympics to the Texas Rangers game, trying intensely to focus on whichever sport he was watching, but often letting the fatigue get the best of him as he would fall asleep sitting up. I watched him flip through a stack of bills, sigh, and lean his head back. I watched him nod off to sleep in his chair out of exhaustion. I heard the way he had to pause during stories to catch his breath. I noticed him hunched over, clinging to the railing for support as he walked up the stairs. I held his hand as he limped a short distance from the kitchen to the dining room, and in watching my grandfather do all of these things, I learned something. Life isn't about what you have. It's about who you have. It's about loving and giving and laughing your way through life. My grandfather taught me that people are what are most important. And honestly, I don't know if he really meant to. He never sat me down and said, "Now listen, hon, people are valuable, don't ever forget it." He did so much more than just tell a story to illustrate a point. He demonstrated it by the way he lived his life. I've encountered plenty of old people who are full of health, possess nice things, and have lots of money, but they're not happy like my granddad. Even though he wasn't always in the best of health, and even though he wasn't the richest man, my granddad was one of the happiest people I know. I knew he was happy when his eyes still lit up and he said, "I love you, hon," even if he didn't have the strength to get out of his chair and hug me. I knew it when he told stories of times past and laughed at all the memories he'd made, even though his voice was soft and tired. I knew it when he put his head up after sighing his way through the bills and said to my grandmother, "Don't worry, hon, we'll get it figured out." I saw happiness when he'd make a fist and quietly say yes to himself every time the Texas Rangers had a good play or Michael Phelps got another gold medal, even though he slept through half the game. I heard it when, even though he knew he shouldn't, Granddad jokingly begged my Mimi for another slice of pie, laughing as he said, "Come on, Mom, just one tiny bite." And how every time she refused, he would look at me with a sparkle in his eyes and say, "Did you know that she's starving me out?" I felt it when, after limping to the dining room table and taking his seat, he squeezed my hand, smiled up at me, and said, "I love you, hon." I saw it when he bowed his head to pray and with tears in his eyes whispered into his handkerchief, "Thank you, God, for my family." Even though I don't remember my granddad ever sitting me down to teach me a lesson, his life, his laughter, and his love taught me the most important ones. And no matter how old I become, those lessons are the ones that will stay with me forever.
I know he will. And so I've enjoyed life. My boys gave me so much fun when I was younger. My boys gave me so much fun. You just don't know how precious your daddies were when they were little boys. They were mischievous sometimes, but they loved their mom and dad, and I knew it. And I'm so thankful for my daughter-in-laws and my grandkids. I'm thankful for my, I love everybody, and I'm looking forward to tomorrow. I know how much fun it's gonna be. I had so much fun in that. I've had just sitting here listening to you all. I've had so much fun. I didn't just look around the room and say, "Thank you, Jesus, for my family." And that's what's so precious to me and my family. All of you fit a certain spot in my heart, and I go to bed every night. Thank you, the Lord, for my family. That's all I got now. I got no more, just and my family. And y'all just made my life. And from in talking to you, listening to you, just knowing you're here and knowing that you love me and knowing you care for me, and I sure do. Is that a word, Cannon? Sure do. I sure do love. And God bless each one. God bless each one of my children.